It's a beautiful city of Wilsonville in the state of Oregon. My name is Jong-woo Han. I'm the president of Korean War Legacy Foundation. We have about more than 1,500 Korean War veterans interviewed, not just from the United States, but from other 21 countries. I just wrapped up the last country, which was India. And I came from India, so that we have a 22 country Korean War veterans interview completed. This is the only one in the world that has 22 country Korean War veterans interview. And I am so proud and I'm very thankful about that. We are doing this to preserve your memory, first of all, because it's been already more than 70 years ago. And we want to do this so that we can honor your service and sacrifice. But at the same time, Korean War has been known as forgotten war, and we don't want that. So we want to make this interview into curricular resources for the teachers when they talk about the Korean War in the context of the Cold War to their students. They can use this interview. So that's why we are doing this. I want to challenge that into the reality of the Korean War as forgotten war. It's my great pleasure and honor to meet you again here in Wilsonville because we met at Tacoma First Baptist Church, right? So you can talk about it, but it's my honor and thank you for coming with your beautiful wife for 67 years?
67, yes.
Sarah, so...
That was 67 years yesterday.
Yesterday. Congratulations and happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourself. What is your name and spell it for the audience, please.
Okay, my name is Charles Lusardi. I go by Chuck. Lusardi is spelled L-U-S as in Sam, A-R-D-I.
Is that, what is the ethnic origin of this last name, Lusardi?
Well, ethnicity-wise,
Yeah.
it's Italian.
Italian.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And what is your birthday?
Well, birthday is December the 24th in 1932.
1932. That makes you...
I will be 90 years old in December the 24th.
90-year-old. I don't know. I think it's a common denomination of Korean War veterans that they look so young.
Well, those of us who are left, as you know, I'm sure, I was just reading a chart that says by the year 2036, we will see the last of the Korean War veterans.
Yes, that's right. That's why we are doing this before it gets too late. We want to preserve your memory.
Well, I want to thank you for doing this because it is obviously to Korean War veterans and to their families, it's important, but it's important in just a historical context. So thank you very much for the work you're doing.
It's my honor, sir, and thank you for the recognition, and that's why we are doing this. You're absolutely right. And you born the Christmas Eve?
Unfortunately, I ruined my mother's Christmas, yes.
No, I think you really celebrated your mother's Christmas Eve, right?
Maybe I should look at it that way,
Yeah,
yes.
be positive, okay? Young man. Where were you born?
I was born in Gladstone, Michigan. As far as my birth certificate is concerned, I was literally born in a logging camp in Upper Michigan.
Upper Michigan. Beautiful. Yeah. And tell me about your family background when you were growing up. Your parents, what they were doing, and your siblings, brothers and sisters.
Well, I come from a family of 5 boys. My mother was a homemaker, and of course with 5 boys, that was more than enough work. My father was a truck driver. Basically, he started out on his family farm, and in the Upper Michigan there was farming, and more often than not there was some logging associated with it. So that's the background on it. The 5 boys that I was the second born of those 5 boys. I had one older brother, George. As a matter of fact, I'll mention here that George and I were both in Korea. So two of us at the same time.
What's your brother's name?
George Wayne Lusardi.
Wayne?
Wayne, W-A-Y-N-E.
And same time, or when was he there?
Same time.
Same time. When was it?
Well, as we unfold my story here, you'll see that we both ran a parallel course in many respects, even though he was a year and a half older than me. And if I just jump right into it, coming out of high school.
What high school?
Escanaba High School.
Could you spell it?
E-S-C-A-N-A-B-A.
Escanaba.
Escanaba.
Escanaba. N as in Nancy.
N as in north.
Yeah. Escanaba High School. When did you graduate?
I graduated in 1950, June of 1950.
Okay.
George, being older than me and a person of his own, he had his idea of where life should take him. And he had left high school a year prior at the request of the principal. And we won't go into the details.
That's a very positive way to describe
Yes.
that. So, but what is your period of Korean War service?
Well,
From when to when?
Korean War service, I started in the regular army in June of 1950, right out of high school. However,
Drafted?
No.
Enlisted?
Enlisted. Prior to that, though, George and I were already members of the Michigan National Guard.
Right.
Because I had joined the National Guard at 16 years old.
Yep.
Of course, on the records, I was 17. But that being the case, that was in February of 1949. George and I became members of the 107th Combat Engineer Battalion of the Michigan National Guard.
107th
107th Combat Engineer Battalion.
Combat Engineer Battalion. Yep.
Of the Michigan National Guard.
Yep.
So consequently, we were already under service conditions, if you will. And when I graduated with the agreement with my mother that if I did graduate from high school, she would sign for me to go into the regular army. And much to her chagrin, I did graduate, and she had to sign.
Why did you want it for army so much that you have to have a condition?
Well, because you'd have to look at the historical aspects of Upper Michigan.
Yeah.
It is a backwater to Michigan in general. It's a recreation portion for the lower Michigan state people. So consequently, there is no future, no significant future in terms of work that one could, apply themselves to in the Upper Peninsula area. So a lot of our younger men at that time went into the service.
And so you wanted to follow that?
Well, it was just the normal, the practical and normal thing to do.
So we'll go back. We will get back to the service period later. But let me ask this question. And did you learn anything about Korean history, or geography about Korea while you were in high school?
The answer is yes, but qualified. And by that I mean I was always interested in geography. That was one of the subjects I really moved towards.
Yeah.
And in our day in high school, it wasn't Korea, it was Chosun.
Yep.
So yes, I knew of Chosun. However, the interesting aspect of it was that at the time that George and I signed up for regular army service, we got our separation papers from the National Guard, and we actually went to get on the bus to go to basic training on June the 26th of 1950, when our folks took us down to the Greyhound bus station. Now we're in Upper Michigan, and we were to report to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And as we got to the bus station, here's a newspaper, and it says "War in Korea." So that was the send-off that we had from Michigan, and of course that was a very difficult moment, I'm sure, for my mother and my father too. But anyway, so George and I left.
So you enlisted to the army with your brother, George, without knowing Korean War broke out, and you were on the way to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and you happened to know the breakout of the Korean War through a newspaper.
That's exactly it. However, we were in the army already, already signed up, because that had happened on like June the 10th.
Right.
So there was an intervening period. But
Right.
yes, when we went to get on to go that morning to report to Fort Knox, Kentucky, we had no idea. We hadn't heard it. There was no TV. We hadn't heard it on the radio. So, yeah, it was a surprise.
So did your parents know that the Korean War broke out before you left for Fort Knox?
They knew it. They drove us from our home downtown to the Greyhound bus station.
Yeah.
And the minute they saw the newspaper, they knew it.
Unbelievable.
It was an interesting moment, yes.
So your parents sort of imagined that how their two sons could come back in one piece.
Well, at that moment, people didn't realize the significance or the magnitude of the Korean War. So I'm sure they had some thoughts of that in nature. War, sons going, hey, that's bad. So yes, there was that aspect, how they were able to measure it with the minimum information we had about what's this war all about.
What did he say, your parents? Do you remember anything they said to you and your brother?
I don't remember, other than, I suppose, the look of, just the look on my mother's face.
Yeah.
Like, it was like saying, get back in the car, we're going home.
Oh, that must be hard for your mom, really.
That was, life throws situations like that us all through our life, and that happened to be one of the most memorable ones for me at 17. And of course, this was June, so I'd had my 17th birthday in the prior December. So I was 17 and a half years old, if you will.
What was George's attitude about it, reaction to it?
No problem.
No problem?
Oh, no. Well, neither one of us reacted to it in the sense of, oh my, we don't want to do that. We didn't even think that.
Okay.
Our thoughts were just, hey, we better get going. But we felt comfortable in one sense that we had already had a year and a half of National Guard training with 2 summer encampments and the basic military training under our belt. And the fact that in the Michigan National Guard, we were with the 107th Combat Engineering Battalion, that would come into play later.
Yeah. So what did you do in Fort Knox? It's a basic military training.
Total basic military training. At that time, the basic training schedule was for 12 weeks. And immediately upon our getting to Fort Knox, it had been changed to 8 weeks basic training. So they just knocked a month off it. So our training was literally from June 30th on through until August. In August, we completed our basic training.
But you were already a soldier, so it was a piece of cake, right?
Well, yes and no. I had a minor problem at basic training because Fort Knox, Kentucky It's in an area that has a lot of poison oak and poison ivy.
Ah,
And when I went through the infiltration course, I wound up, here I was with poison oak or poison ivy on both arms. And they really, in a matter of a couple of days, I was hospitalized. Well, that really upset me because I thought, oh my God, I'll not graduate with my training class, which is a group of 200 men. Each training company is 200. And I thought, oh, this is not good. Because I want to stay with George, or I just want to get this over with. Well, I didn't have to worry. Things were in such a state that by the time I was recovered and sent back to my training company, he never missed a beat. So I missed a few things, but I had already had the opportunity to do a lot of that stuff in the National Guard.
so where did you leave for Korea? From where? When?
Well, from Fort Knox, Kentucky, because of the fact that we had National Guard training with the combat engineer now, with an engineering outfit, we were the only two individuals pulled out at the end of that training cycle and not sent to advanced infantry training, because basic training is basic. Then they go to advanced infantry training, but on the morning when we graduated, which that picture is indicative of,
Yeah.
this one.
Can you show that to us?
Yeah, this is the picture that's taken.
Up to your chin, yes.
This
Wow.
is a picture that's taken at the time you graduate. Every recruit, you're a recruit at that time. And even though we were PFCs in the National Guard, we didn't get recognition for that at the regular Army level. Mm-hmm. That was just something that. But in view of the fact that we had engineering on our record in one fashion or another, what happened was, as they called out, assignments, where to go, because they're spread out over a whole host of different
Unit.
Different training centers.
Yeah.
Lusardi, over here. And we got orders to go to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And Fort Belvoir, Virginia is the engineering training center and the engineering research center for the U.S. Army. Mm. It's just outside of Washington, D.C. You probably might be familiar with that. And that was an interesting thing. That was another...
Belvoir, B-A-L...
B-E-L-V-O-I-R. I-O-I-R?
Yeah.
Yeah, you get that. Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
Yep.
So we were given just a very short few days to go home and then report to Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
Yep.
We did. We went through basic training or engineering training there. When we got there, they said, okay, we have 5 schools that you can take your pick. Mm. We can have construction, we can have bridge construction, just basic construction, bridge construction, demolition, topographical mapping, which would be a surveyor, and heavy equipment. Well, George and I, having come from a sawmill country, and we were around heavy equipment all of our short lives already, so we immediately thought 2 things. Well, if you're going to be over there in Korea, having a big chunk of steel to sit behind is pretty smart thinking, and that's the route we want to go. So we both chose heavy equipment operator. So we had 10 weeks of training at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, operating all types of equipment, from Caterpillar tractors to graders to turnipoles, whatever. So when we finished that, at that time we were then qualified equipment operators, quote unquote, and we were given 30 days. I think it was less than 30. I think it was probably about 20 days. that from the time we left Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and were then ordered to report to Camp Stoneman, California, which is a debarkation center at San Francisco. So by December I think right around December 15th, we had taken our leave at home, taken our first big train ride from Chicago all the way to San Francisco, arrived at Camp Stoneman, and we were then at what they call a replacement depot. And these are replacements going to a host of different commands. So that was the case. So I had my 18th birthday at Camp Stoneman. There was a lineup, and then they had all these orders, and they'd start calling names. People would fall out. They went two directions. There were two warehouses to go into. One of them you went into, and you came out with a fur parka. And we thought, oh my goodness, those are the poor fools who are going to Korea because they need a cold. It's wintertime over there. We wound up going through the M1 rifle thing, so we spent the next day and a half cleaning rifles up. Still no order as to which way you're going to go, but we found out that was an indication of where you were going, whether you got a fur coat or an M1 rifle. If you got a rifle, you were going to Korea. The others were going to Alaska because they were building up defense positions in Alaska because of a concern, that something might happen over there also. So that was it, and that was the first trip that I made out underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. George and I were still together. We went through every one of these series of events in lockstep. So the next thing was to be consigned to a troop transport, which there was about 3,500 of us backed on this troop transport, and off we went, and about a 14-day trip across to Yokohama, Japan.
Start from San Francisco?
From San Francisco, yeah. Yep, you go down to the Oakland Army docks, is where the ships departed from. And in my records, I was going through and looking at, and they have you on a shipment number. It was WJ3609 or something. Your shipment number, like sending freight. So anyway, that was it. We arrived in Yokohama, Japan, and that was interesting because it was, you're going into a whole new world. But debarked from the ship there and went to Camp Drake, which was the replacement depot in Japan, primary replacement depot, I believe, for all activity there in the Far East Command. They had no ships left because they were still dispersed from the Hungnam evacuation. So we wound up going from Sasebo to Busan on a Japanese ferry, which was another interesting experience. Arrived in Busan, I believe it was January the 11th. By the time we hit Busan, there were probably 2.5 million refugees packed into that city. It was one terrible mess of just humanity. And so, that added to this whole environmental situation, I'm sure. But anyway, we arrived on the dock in Busan, immediately boarded deuce and a half trucks and tried to get through this literally mass of humanity, and made our way just north of Busan. I don't recall where it was, but we moved up within 2 days. We were in Daegu. And at that time, what we were assigned to, we didn't really, you have no idea where you're going. You don't really have orders. At that time, it was so chaotic that, okay, whatever's happening, just go with the flow. We found out that we were assigned to the 54th Engineering Maintenance Company.
54th Engineering Maintenance Company?
Yep. It was.
What?
It was what they call a bastard outfit, which It is not part of a division. It supports a division, but it doesn't belong to it. And there are hundreds of these units like that that are
independent of any battalion or any regiments.
right. They can be assigned, at the whim of the administration there, the generals, to wherever they're needed, and it's a quick move. 54th, however, I did find out in later years that it was basically associated with supporting the equipment maintenance for the 25th Division. So anyway, George and I were assigned to that, and that really...
Together, again.
Oh yeah, we never got separated whatsoever. And we were really upset about that because, hey, what do you mean, maintenance? But this is in January, and it
Why
is...
you were upset? Because it was just maintenance?
Well, because we wanted to be bulldozer operators. We wanted to be equipment operators. That's what we were trained for. But the conditions then, that was my first winter in Korea, and it was cold. I mean, it was so cold that everything froze instantaneously if you didn't have some protection. It was behind the lines. We stayed in Daegu for, probably 90 days or more, and then moved on up to Daejeon. Well, it finally got to the point where the company commander called us in and says, what are you idiots up to, you're in good position here. Well,
Safe.
yeah. Well, and we tried to tell him basically, hey, that's not the problem. The problem is that we are something else. We think we're heavy. We love heavy equipment. Well, the next day we had orders to get out of there. They could pack her up and, throw whatever you got left in your duffel bag and, be here at such and such time, and off we went. We got on a deuce and a half and headed north. And that took us up just north and east of Uijeonbu. We both went to headquarters and service company of the 65th Combat Engineer Battalion. 65th Combat Engineer Battalion, 25th Infantry Division. Now the reason for the emphasis and designation on Combat Engineer Battalion is that if you are an integral engineering element of a division, then you're that combat engineer support group for that division, and that's all you work with is basically that division. So H&S, Headquarters and Service Company, is what that is, and normally they supply personnel to all of the line companies, A, B, C, D. And we wound up getting there here we're in the back of a deuce and a half truck traveling it took us 2 days to get up there to work our way up front. Get out, jump down from the truck, and never even got stabilized there. They immediately, here's a first sergeant coming out there, and he had paperwork for us. They brought some with them, and says, hey, Lusardi George, get on that truck over there, and Lusardi, C, get on that 3/4 ton unit over there. They were ready for us. Things were still busy up there. So the 3/4 ton, I don't know where George went, but I do know that George wound up being assigned to operate a D8 bulldozer.
D8?
D8.
What is that?
That's the biggest bulldozer that Caterpillar made at that time. And so the D8s, though, they weigh about 35 tons. So you don't move them up into the harm's way because you can't move them out very quickly.
Yeah.
Well, George went off, and they work on airfields, things like that. They're in a support position where they're taking care of all of the stuff that's keeping everybody on the line going. I wound up getting in this 3/4 ton unit, which had a 55-gallon drum of diesel fuel and a grease gun and a case of C rations and a couple other things. And this, here you're pretty naive, but you aren't acclimated to that type of environment up there as to what's going on. So I asked the driver, where are we going? He just looks at you and doesn't say nothing. If you do talk to them, you don't get much response. They don't have much, they aren't very, outgoing to outsiders. If you're part of the team, you've been there a while and you know what the hell is going on, you soon get treated different. Right. But anyway, we drove for probably 35 miles. God, it was a long ways. It seems longer because there was literally the roads are almost non-existent in those days. Pull up into a patch of weeds out there, and here's a D4 bulldozer sitting there. Well, a D4 is the smallest bulldozer that Caterpillar makes, and it only weighs about 7 or 8 tons, and so it's more mobile. It can move around. It can be moved with lighter equipment and whatnot. Yeah. So I was given that D4. I'd never seen one before. That was not one that we had trained on. To make a long story short, the guy we dumped off the 55-gallon drum of fuel, my case of sea rations, because that was going to have to last me a while, I found out, and the other equipment that he had there, and I was just left there with this D4. And you're at the front now. However, the beauty of Korea, as you well know, in the north up there with the hills and whatnot, I was usually on the back side of the hill, and the poor infantry guy was on the front side of the hill. My job, though, was, and I think of it and I reflect on it, and it was really being in a position to provide some means of access to support everything that was going on, where the real action was going. Because we had people sitting on top of ridges and whatnot that just were impossible to get to. There was no roads. The roads were creek beds. So my job was to try to push some kind of what I call cow trail up these hills and ridges, whoever I was assigned to, so that you could get a Jeep up there. Because the Jeep was the mule. The Jeep was the one that went up with supplies, ammunition, food supplies and whatnot, and brought back out the wounded. And I guess that was, I felt good about, after several months of really horsing that thing around, that I was good enough that I could make a road. Yeah, I bet I could do it farther than anybody else.
Yep.
That
was critical. You have to have a road so that logistics can be supplied, right?
Absolutely.
And of soldiers.
Yeah.
So after you departed from your brother, George, were you able to communicate to each other?
No communication whatsoever. However, what did happen on 2, maybe 3 occasions, I tell you, things do get confusing because over the years, you read so much about the history of Korea that things get intermingled. But I'd say George and I met 2 or 3 times during the next 7 months. And that was a case only because he lost his D8. Had a problem with it. It literally fell apart because the equipment we used was what we call rust buckets. These were old leftover World War II pieces of equipment coming out of Okinawa, Japan, and other areas in the Far East. And they were not, at that point, in 50, 51, and even into 52, it wasn't until mid-52, 53 that they started getting in the new military equipment, as I understand it.
And when did you leave Korea, by the way?
Well, then left Korea in March of 52.
And until you left Korea, so your main service was to build a road for the other people, right?
Well, to support anything. I served, For example, for a while, a short time, I served with the Turk Brigade. The Turk Brigade was attached to the 25th, just like the French were attached to the 2nd Division, etc. Right. And so with the Turks, they were just part of our unit. So if they had a need, and it was an interesting story because the need that they had received a D7 bulldozer, and nobody knew how to run it. So, and again, I'm not aware of any of this going on. Somebody comes to me and says, hey, load her up. You got a truck here. And more often than not, I would move my D4 in the back of a 5-ton dump truck. I could smash it in there backwards. I mean, literally, I'd spread the trunnions on my cat would spread the sides of the bed of the truck to get it in by a couple of inches. Wow. But anyway, we'd haul off, and they said this particular time, I could go to an infantry regiment, I could go to an artillery outfit, I could go, one time I went on what they call a probe with a group of tanks, which was foolishness because they didn't have a tank dozer. So they said, well, we'll send this D4 can go along with you if there's anything to push out of the road, you'll get it taken care of for you. Well, that's a long story. It didn't work. But with the Turks, I went to the Turks and come to find out they had this really nice D7, which I loved. D7 was the perfect cat. And they had this youngster who, I'm 18 years old, by the way, and here they had this real kid. I think he looked like he was like 15 years old. Anyway, this little Turkish boy, and they officer could speak English, but nobody else could. So he told me, he says, well, we've got a cat, we have nobody to operate it, this man's going to operate it, this kid, and you train him. Well, okay. So I spent almost 5 days with him there. And anyway, and I got him to the point where he could, first we'd learn how to service it, and then how to start it, and then how to operate it. And he did well.
Very good. So tell me about this. What was like to be there as a soldier, a combat engineer, soldier, and operating the bulldozer, and living condition? Where did you sleep? What did you eat? How was it to be there?
Well, every soldier has half a pup tent, all right? So we got a pup tent, but you only got half of it because you always got a buddy. It's a buddy system. Well, I didn't have no buddy, all right, because I'm me and my cat. I slept under it. There were under it? Sure. Wow. Yeah, you take it, and with the cat, that's beautiful because you can plow the rocks out of the way, make a nice smooth flat place, and you put the blade down and you're protected on that end. You crawl under the back end and there you are. Or what we did, I should have bought a picture of it. One time George was with me, so we had 2 tent halves, and you tie it to the track of the cat, peg it down, and you got this nice house under there. More often than not, well, most of the time, that's how I lived for the next 7 months. It was, if I had a cot to sleep on, it had to be if I was supporting an artillery outfit because they were back just far enough, usually 3 to 5 miles. All right, and here they've got field kitchens, they've got their command center, their operations offices, they're in tents, and they often have tents with a cot in them. Well, that was a momentary, piece of heaven because we could enjoy that. But no, that last 7 months was on the ground. I mean, it was. I don't camp. I never go camping. I don't want to go camping no more.
Because you had enough.
Well, I had enough. That's okay. But no, it was a dirty, messy. If you wanted to get clean clothes or whatnot, there's only one way to do it, up on the front, and they have what they call wash centers. They're a units that go around with deuce-and-a-half trucks with generators and water purification stuff and whatnot. They set up an operation where you've got a big series, a couple of big, huge tents where you go in one end and they've got a shower system set up. And as you go in, you strip off, get rid of everything you got on, pack up only your helmet and the stuff you're going to pick up again. And as you go through the shower, you get rinsed out, and you come out the other tent, and here's all these clothes. Well, so you're picking up a whole new set of fatigues and everything but boots.
It's like a car wash system.
Caddy Car Wash did, yeah, I think exactly the same. So you come out of there, and
How often were you able to take a shower?
only when you came across one.
I see.
And so it could be a month. It could be, I don't think less than a month.
You could be very smelly.
Oh, what? By the time you got done with that, your fatigues were in rags. They literally rotted off you. There were times, now this is the second winter also. The second winter was worse than the first for me. And I caught walking pneumonia, and I had all kind of difficulties that never shut me down, but sure weakened me. Anyway, we made it through that, and it was one of the, I don't know, one of those things you did and survived, but never want to do it again.
What was your rank at the time?
Well, at the time we went in, when we went overseas, we were PFC. We'd made PFC. And then somewhere in I lost all my records because those that were burnt up, you might have heard.
National Archive?
Yep, in the National Archives. However, the story to jump ahead is that I lost all my records, so when I came out of Korea and got to the United States again, after we were departed there, I got to Fort Ord, California, and I was hospitalized for 2 weeks. Well, that's what they were trying to find out. They never did pinpoint it. In later days, I found out they had all these x-rays and that, and he said, well, he's got, from the walking pneumonia and what I had a lot of scar tissue on my lungs. Well, that turned into be, I keep jumping around here. I went to Fort Ord, went to the hospital, was classified fit for duty. So George and I were both then reassigned to an engineering outfit in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and down on the southern border. And we no more got there, and that unit, that 597th Light Equipment Company, they were called up to go to Spain to build a SAC base along with another bunch of engineering outfits that were put. We're taking too long.
No.
The brigade that was being put together was called the 20th Engineering Brigade, and we were supposed to go to Spain to build a new SAC base at Torreon, Spain. To make a long story short there, we got down to Arizona, spent about 2 months down there getting ready, hauled all of our equipment, along with a whole bunch of other outfits, up to the Oakland Army Pier again, right where we had left the last time, and loaded them onto a ship and headed out down through the Panama Canal. So we got to see the Panama Canal. And wound up going out into the Atlantic, and no more than got out there by the Azores. Captain comes on and says, listen up, we're not going to Spain. Franco doesn't want us, because Franco was still in charge of Spain. Well, we'll be going to La Police, France. Sum total is I spent the rest of my first 3-year tour in France. George, too. We're still together.
Wow.
100%. Same outfit going on. The only time we were separated was in Korea when he went his way and I went mine. In France, we had the same situation.
But let's focus on Korea, because the thing is, when you were there, what was the most difficult thing? If I ask you to pinpoint out of so many, what was the most difficult thing? Or, hated?
Well, actually, any of the things that we were doing that were part of our job, I can't even put those in difficulty. It's just, those were things that we could accommodate. We could do something we want. The thing that was most difficult for me in Korea was seeing the civilian population on the few occasions that the first 7 months, we saw the civilian population. Matter of fact, here we are in Daegu and Daejeon. You've got the houseboys and you've got the washerwomen and whatnot. So you got a houseboy or someone there that's, they had it so well organized they could take all your your fatigues out. They'd come back all cleaned up and pressed and, folded beautifully and whatnot. And that was difficult to see families and youngsters and the women. For example, in Daejeon, Daegu there, right on the river. I got a picture of all these women washing clothing on the river, and all the kids, the little ones, running around. And that was bad. But the worst came later when I went forward, because even in the forward areas, in the damnedest situation you can imagine.
You mean Ujeongbu area?
Well, by now I'm over in the Iron Triangle area.
Oh.
I'm over in Kumhwa.
Kumhwa.
Oh, yes. 25th Division wound up being planted right in the middle on the Iron Triangle. So the work I was doing was being done in Chorwan, Kumhwa, and on up into that apex up to Pyongyang.
Pyongyang.
Well, there's Pyongyang and Pyongyang.
Yeah.
Pyongyang is the most northern point of the triangle up there.
Yep.
Now, the Mundingni Valley, all that area, that's where I spent my time.
That's one of the most severe battleground, right? And when you were there, it must be the late of 1951 and early 52. How was the situation there? Can you describe and how far you were in the front line? Tell me about it, please.
Well, I was within sight and sound of it on a daily basis. But I was not in a position, well, I'll put it this way. Two things that I look back and say, somebody was watching out for me. Mm-hmm. And that is, number one, all of the ground that I plowed with that D4, I never hit a mine.
Wow.
And you never think of it. You don't sit there and worry about that.
Yeah, right.
That's not a consideration. I plowed some up, but I never hit one that blew a track or took me out. Secondly, I was never picked off by a sniper.
Oh.
A cat, operating a cat in those environments, you're literally a sitting duck for two reasons. There's no armament. Everybody says, well, what kind of armament did you have? I said, well, we had a T-shirt and we had a fatigue shirt. Both of those were, but this is well before they had armored vest or anything. No, in that sense, the closest was looking at when I'm trying to push accessibility into an area that something had just happened, and watching the damn Jeeps come out with the hamburger that they were bringing back out. That was tough. That was bad. But the other aspect of it was there were times when we were within this range of activity where you think there's no civilians whatsoever. There couldn't be. And out of nowhere, here's some little ones, and it's always either going to be women, old men, and children. The rest are all, being utilized. That was the hardest thing. You mean
you felt that it was too sorry for them?
Well, look here, Dr. Hahn. You're sitting there, you're doing your thing, and there's not one thing you can do for these children or these mothers or whatnot? Well, I say not one thing. There is one thing you can do. First thing you did is you unloaded all your sea rations. Anything you had edible, give it to them.
Yeah.
You know, at my age, you know, here you're still 18 years old, and you're learning. This is the new exposure you've got to what the world's all about, or some aspects of what the world's got to offer. You don't like it because you feel so helpless, you know. But what do? You get back on your cat and go do what you got to do.
Right.
You know. The funny stories are when Greg likes my story. He says, "Well, what's the funniest story you ever remember?" I said, "Well, one of the things that I had as a standing order was, if there is any structure standing, knock it down because of snipers, and you know, just so and out in the outer country, you know, it wasn't communities you were seeing; they were these little family enclaves, 4 or 5 huts or houses or remnants of them, what's left." And the one that Greg really liked the story. He says, "I was taking out this one house. It was you could tell it was the head person's house. It was really nice. Well, it was burnt out, and a couple of walls standing. And the D4 isn't very big. The blade is only 10 feet wide. So as I was pushing the remnants wall down there, I didn't realize where the honey pot was for the house. And as I came over there, it was square, a big one, but I apparently hit it just right on the diagonal because the blade just plopped right into it. And when it did, the fan on the front of the cat went in, and the fan blade caught this crap all over it. God almighty. And you can imagine, you get the picture.
Yeah.
Well, what do? I immediately back out of there, and I'm backing up, and I was working on, there was a river there, a small river. And so I thought, holy right. And I had no idea I knew it wasn't very deep, but the bank was a drop-off about that far to the water, about 2 feet. So I just spun that cat around, and I just started barreling towards her, over to the river. It was only about 50 yards away. And I just drove right off and went right into the water. And so I'm sitting there in the water, letting the fan wash me up. And I thought, well, geez, this is a good time to do some fishing. I always carried hand grenades in my toolbox.
Right.
So I unwrapped one from my old T-shirt I had, pulled the pin, and I just threw it as far upstream as I could. And underwater, it doesn't make a big deal. It's just woof.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, and this is one of those cases that goes back to the people, because all this little krill and whatnot come floating up, you know, and they're all out of nowhere. Here was 2 women, and I think it was three or 4 children, little ones, came out there, and they were in their long dresses with the aprons, you know. Man, they waited they went wading right out in the river and scooping those things up, and they brought them up on the shore, and then and I was there for a bit, so by then they went and built fire, and they'd put all these things on a log to kind of in the heat to smoke and cook them. I told Greg that.
That's the American way to fish.
Well, but I told Greg, I said, and excuse my English, but I said, Greg, that's when the shit really hit the fan.
Yeah.
You know? And I says, but this was the outcome of it. But anyway, no, that was the most difficult thing. Seeing what humanity had to do to survive under conditions like this. But the thing that I have always countered that with is the resilience of the Korean people.
Have you been back to Korea since you left Korea as a Korean War veteran?
Yes, Sarah and I went back to Korea in
When?
1996.
And that was it, or?
That was it.
That was it. So even though it was not 21st century, it was end of the 20th century. And when you go back, when you went back, please give us sort of before and after picture of Korea. What did you saw in 1951 and 52? And what did you see in 1996?
Well, in 51, 52, everything in my memory here, Dr. Hahn, is black and white. All right? There was no color. And I can't get away from that aspect of it.
Yeah.
Going back in 1996 was like, it was, when we came into Seoul, it was like going into Los Angeles. And I thought, I can't, however, we had seen just prior to that, you know, the Olympics had been there a few years prior, and we had watched the pictures, and I was
1988.
Sitting there agog at that. But no, looking at Korea and the statement I've always made to the students that I speak to and whatnot, I said, well, and again, going back to the resilience and just the ability of the Korean people to respond to whatever the need is with what they have got available to do something with. It was unbelievable. I just can't say enough about it.
So you saw the resilience of Korean people during the war, and another interview that I had with Merle Smith, he was the third engineer of Meredith Victory, which was the civil ship that
I remember it well.
That carried the 14,000 North Korean refugees, and what he said to me over and over again that he never saw any Korean person who actually was crying during that disastrous war period. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. Even the children.
Even the children.
Even the children. They're, you know, we use the term stoic, you know, the stoicism, but it's more than that. It's neither resignation nor anything else, but it is that ability to recognize that hey, I can't waste my energy feeling sorry for myself here. I've got to see what I can do to survive here. Survival.
Survivor.
Yeah. No, that I would echo his sentiments 100%. Yep.
When you left Korea in 1952, did you ever imagine that Korea would become like this today? You know the rank of Korean economy now in the world economy, right?
Well, didn't really give it a lot of thought for many years here, Dr. Hahn, because even as coming back, what happened is the Korea thing, the European thing, I came back and George and I came back. Same thing, same boat, here we are.
That's
come back through Fort
story.
Dixon, you know, through East Coast. But what happened was we were debating whether or not to re-enlist. Because our tour of duty was up. So I hadn't made up my mind. And George was pretty well, I'm going back in the service, which was good. He was made for it. But what happened was I broke down with TB. I started hemorrhaging and wound up going into the VA hospital.
Tuberculosis, you mean?
Huh?
Tuberculosis, TB.
I didn't understand it.
TB means the tuberculosis.
Yep. Well, you know, that's one thing about the Korean environment at that time.
Yep.
You had a hemorrhagic fever, tuberculosis, and, you know, frostbite. Those were, other than being shot, those were the three highest elements that took people out on both sides. In my case, I didn't realize. It goes back to that time I was hospitalized in Fort Ord. They missed the boat because I had TB at that time, and they didn't know it. And so here I wound up. By then, I was really going down. I was down to, you know, less than 140 pounds, and
Wow.
you know, and I just didn't have it. Obviously, I was on my way out. Well, to make a long story short on that one, I did go in. I reported to the VA hospital at Sawtell in Los Angeles because my folks had moved from Michigan to Redlands, California, while we were in Korea. So when we came back, they were in Redlands, just out of San Bernardino. And so that's where I was in this intervening period, George and I both. Well, I wound up going in the hospital. George wound up re-enlisting and said, okay, see you later, I'm off. And my stay at Sawtell was very short because they says, well, okay, you're in such bad shape, we don't think you're going to make it anyway.
Wow.
So I wound up going to...
That's serious.
Oh, yeah. So they said there's 5 different hospitals that operate for TB. Well, they would be, what do you call them? The wards are, I can't think of the word. But anyway, they're where you're secluded ward, where you can't get in, get out, because you're a threat to society. But anyway, I wound up choosing going, of the 5 that they offered me, was one in Fort Whipple, Prescott, Arizona. Well, I know Arizona because I was in Fort Huachuca, right? Well, 2 different things. Prescott, Arizona is a mile high, got snow and all that. But anyway, that's where I went. Prescott, Arizona, I spent the next 18 months there, 16 months, because I already spent a couple there. So in the process of that, though, when I went in, I found out later, because Sarah was one of my nurses.
Ah.
And that's why we have been married for 67 years, because when I did survive and was let out of the hospital in 1955, Sarah and I were married. So that's,
wonderful story. Huh?
well, that, you know, of all the things going around.
But going back to the topic, whether you imagine Korea would become like this today?
Had no idea what Korea, I didn't give it a thought. For 40 years, we didn't do anything, even, and that's why I intervened with this other. We survived, we started a family and whatnot. That 40 years was I went to college on GI Bill and whatnot. Never thought much of Korea. As a matter of fact, I was working with individuals. I worked for Tektronix here in Oregon for 10 years. And there were people that were working there that were also Korean War veterans. Mm-hmm. We never talked about it.
Why?
We didn't. I don't know why. I can't answer that one. That is unanswerable.
That's why I think it's been forgotten, because even you didn't want to talk about it, you forgot about it because you were busy, you have to marry, you have to have a family, you have to raise children, and you have to make money, right?
That's exactly that. But the other aspect of it was that for many, it wasn't something you really wanted to recall. You know, the aspects you had seen. So trying to relate that to what Korea was becoming was a non sequitur. You just didn't.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and we have found since then that most of the veterans that we talk with and work with pretty much had the same experience.
Exactly.
We didn't, you know, that wasn't the important element of life. It wasn't, we weren't trying to impress anybody or tell them. However, we did feel a little bit like the Vietnam veterans did. We weren't considered, you know, any kind of heroes, if you will.
You are not same generation. The Vietnam veterans and the Korean War veterans, they are different, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And so you have this very unique perspective and position to be able to give us comparative picture of Korea in 1950 and now 21st century. What would you say to yourself about your own legacy as a Korean War veteran? What is your legacy?
I'll tell you the term that Sarah and I use when we reflect on this, which in our older age is very often, is that the term that we would use is we've been blessed. I look at things maybe as the Oriental culture, the Asian culture, and that is things were meant to be. Mm-hmm. All right? If one thing had not happened, another will not happen. So all of those things taken in sequence or in order, and I would not have met Sarah had it not been for Korea. So I guess maybe I've just answered something in my own mind, and that is, I really come back to Korea was the starting point for our real life.
Rest of your life.
Well, I'll give you one quick example. I've talked, Dr. Starr, the heart surgeon, you know, he was a Korean War veteran. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, he was a surgeon, a MASH surgeon. And he's here, and you know, he was one of those first did the heart valve thing. And he's still here. He's coming up on 100 years old.
Really?
Oh yeah. And I've been trying to get him for years to come to our meetings and talk, but he won't. And I understand. But Dr. Starr, I've talked to him, and I asked him, I said, you know, Dr. Starr, of all your experience in Korea, how do you relate that? What does it have to do with what you did when you came back into the world again, so to speak? He said, one word, everything. Now, and I point that out because, you know, for me as an individual, in the role that, you know, I happen to play, to have that thought. But for an individual like that who survived and then went on to do such significant things, and I asked him, I said, well, in what respect, you know, how is that? And he says, well, in Korea, he says, when we were doing providing medical service to the wounded veterans, he said, or to the wounded soldiers, he says, we were under real strict military orders as to what we could and could not do, procedures we could and could not. He says, we had to just throw those away. Right. And he says, we took our chances if somebody called us down. But anyway, but Korea today, I just feel so good about it, that Korea, now I know, I don't know if you know, we have a John Lim. Have you ever met? John Lim is our first Oregon Korean senator. And John and I've known John since '95. And he was one of those houseboys. John was a houseboy in Korea.
Really?
Yeah, he tells me. I keep telling John, I said, well, John, you know, you were just a kid when I went through Busan. You were probably in that crowd standing there because he was 14 years old, all right, at that time. But anyway, there are people like John and all of the Korean community here in the greater metropolitan area, the Koreans that we have met, the accolades that the Korean government and the Korean people have provided to Korean veterans. It's undiminished even today. Mm-hmm. And we really appreciate that. So the work that Greg and I are doing now, and I'm getting to the point where I'm running out of gas. I'm ready to sit back. But Greg came on the scene, and the work we're doing with KWMFO, the Korean War Memorial Foundation of Oregon, and the city of Wilsonville, which is our host here, I can never give them enough accolades as to, hey, thank you for being there and doing what you've done, because this is the legacy, that is the legacy that Sarah and I can leave. Yep. And I include Sarah because she is my life, has been. I'm here, our family's here, and we have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. The girl is our oldest. They're all non-drinkers, non-smokers, providers to the community.
You're going to live forever.
Why were we so blessed? I don't know why, and I'm not going to even question it. It's not me.
Where is George now?
George died in 1994 of the residual He came back from Europe after he'd spent 10 and a half years, almost 11 years in the service. He was in Europe and was shipped home with TB. And he died in '94, which is another interesting story because Sarah's father, who was a Second World War veteran, Navy veteran, lived with us for 35 years. George came out in the last 3 years of his life. He spent each summer with Sarah and I, another one of those blessings. And then he went back and he died of TB in Veterans Hospital in Springfield, Missouri.
Are you proud of your Korean War veteran?
Am I proud to be? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm proud to be a veteran. I don't care what people think of I don't care what the general population thinks of our military, or I'm not proud of our country at this moment in time whatsoever. As a matter of fact, a lot of the things that we as veterans are proud of from the military family standpoint are being stressed right now very, very badly.
Yep.
So yes, I'm proud. And I would do it over again. Yeah.
Chuck, we met at the Tacoma First Baptist Church in Tacoma, and now we met again, and now I have your story. So we're going to edit this and upload it so that teachers can use it. But on behalf of Korean Nation, I am U.S. citizen but Korean American. On behalf of Korean Nation, I want to thank you and your brother George and your family, your parents, for letting their two sons to serve in the Korean War. And I want to thank you. And because of your honorable service and spirit, that Korea is now what it is. So
it's a two-way street.
Yes.
I realize, but the Korean people, without that inner something, they made it happen.
Thank you again for coming and sharing your story and for your service.
Thank you for the opportunity, and the best of luck with your whole program.